Every day is a Thornberry day. Smashing, smashing, smashing news. There's a sticky wicket.
Tokyo RPG Factory. When Square Enix first opened this studio in response to the shocking popularity of games like Bravely Default, most of us were probably expecting more games, well, like Bravely Default, but its first two titles, I Am Setsuna and Lost Sphere, were lacking. They were low budget, very low budget, and they were given a very short amount of time. For what it's worth, I think they did a fine job with what they were given. I enjoyed both games and I thought both stories were by far and away the high points of each game, but it was starting to look like Square Enix had completely reverted to their old nobody likes traditional RPGs anymore stance they had prior to the runaway success of Bravely Default. But after Lost Sphere, Tokyo RPG Factory went dark for a little while. We heard very little outside a brief statement from the studio head saying they were working on something that should surprise many, and then in February that something was revealed as Ononaki. Having but a whiff of the two titles that came before it, Ononaki looked like a huge step forward, and with Chrono Trigger director Takashi Takeda on board as the creative producer, expectations are quite a bit higher for the RPG Factory's third title. The demo, which has been available for a little while now, lets you experience a good chunk right from the beginning. Have they managed to make something that doesn't feel like it's being held back though? Well, it's tough to say. It is undoubtedly a step forward, many steps forward in fact, and nary a step backward in sight. Sometimes in the pursuit of betterment you forget about the things you already do well. I Am Setsuna and Lost Sphere had interesting stories, and Ononaki doesn't break that streak. I'd say it's more intriguing than either of its predecessors right off the bat. Graphically speaking, it's significantly better. It still has some of that Tokyo RPG Factory aesthetic about it, but everything from the character models to the effects are far more detailed. The camera view you have is much closer too, which helps shed a lot of that low-budget RPG Maker-like vibe that the previous games had. I don't think you can say outright whether the combat is strictly better than Lost Sphere, as you could have said about Lost Sphere in relation to I Am Setsuna, because the combat in Ononaki is just different. It's an action-based system compared to the turn-based systems in the previous games. Whether you think it's an upgrade or not will come down to preference, but the system in Ononaki has had plenty of effort put into it. It's somewhere between a hack and slash and a more technical action combat system. Enemies are on field in real time, so there are no separate battle screens. Basic attacks string together, and you also have special skills which can be learned and assigned to various buttons. What you also have though is the ability to switch playstyle on the fly. In a system somewhat reminiscent of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, your weapon comes from another character that partners with you. In this case, they're called demons. Each demon has its own skill tree, abilities, stats, weapon, and playstyle. They even have their own stories, which you can learn more about by bonding with them. There seems to be a ton of variety, even within a single demon, thanks to the skill trees and learnable abilities. Now, I didn't think that music was overall lacking in either I Am Setsuna or Lost Sphere, but the music I've heard so far in Ononaki is particularly great for the most part. It did a great job giving some of the early impactful scenes just that little bit extra. And yet, having heaped all this praise on it, there's still just something about it that feels not quite there. It's the little things. It's the way text boxes and even text itself transitions in and out. It's the default control scheme. It's this odd little feeling that you're still playing something that's low budget. I want to say that it lacks polish. The experience just isn't as smooth and sublime as it could be. It's a little rough around the edges. Hopefully this is something they're working on in the lead up to launch. Day one patches are par for the course these days, and it could prove to be the difference between Ononaki being a good game or a great game.
Thanks for the liking, subscribing, and the sharing!